Hello, Jeremy.
Hi, Chloe. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
Oh my gosh, I love how your voice just jumped up like an entire
Oh,
octave than what
I
we were
get
doing
so excited.
right before we were recording. Whoa, he's awake now, everybody.
You got to bring the energy, the middle school voice energy to the podcast.
100%. It's funny that you even mentioned that because last week I try not to listen to my podcast because I don't really love the sound of my own voice despite how much I talk. And I was listening to one that I did with Darcy and I was like, "Oh my god. Do I yell at all of my guests? Am I always at that high of a register where I'm like, "I'm so excited that you're here." It's like almost it's too aggressive cheerful.
Everyone's your own worst critic, right? Like I feel like no one else feels that way, but I think it's good to listen to yourself just to have a sanity check. You're like, am I being too intense? But
Yeah, it's
it's
like I
hard to
need
see it
to
through that lens.
right, I gotta lower the register, calm down a little bit, drink maybe less caffeine. Oh man. But I am super glad that you were able to come on today. For those who are listening, we've got Jeremy Schneider on, the founder and face of Personal Finance Club, which is, I gotta tell you, every time I Google anything like niche in the index fund world or investing world, and even it doesn't have to be that niche, your website comes up. So your SEO is on point.
Really? That's
Yes.
actually shocking to hear because I feel like we do a pretty terrible job of that. I feel like we have two articles that get any traffic at all.
No, I feel like all the time, especially with the images, because it's like anytime I Google, like, I can't think of maybe like a backdoor Roth IRA or a Roth conversion ladder. It's like Jeremy's blog comes up. I'm like, oh, hey, I know that guy.
That's true. Actually, yeah, if you click Google Images, but I feel like not many people do that. Search like a finance topic and then look at the images, but I don't know, maybe they do.
They should. They'd find some good images.
Yeah,
But
get some good infographics.
yeah, exactly. Well, welcome. Anything you would add to who are you? Give us your elevator speech.
Who are you and what are you doing
Who
here?
are you?
Yeah, so my background is I started a company in college. I turned down a job offer from Microsoft instead of going to work full time. Instead, I started a company. I grew that for 12 years and then I sold it at the age of 34 for just over $5 million. My share after tax was about $2 million, which is a lot of money that I did not want to waste. And so I started reading all of the books on personal finance and investing I could get my hands on. So I wasn't one of those garbage men who like wins the lottery and then becomes a garbage man again because he like wasted all the money. I was like, I don't want to do that. And you read a few of these books and you realize that they all say the exact same thing. And like the core basic common sense, not it's not common sense, that's the wrong term, but the basic best practices of investing in personal finance are generally pretty simple and straightforward, but it's not the message that we often hear. Maybe you and I do because we live in this world, but in normal pop culture, you hear credit cards and spending beyond your means and crypto and options and like all this like crazy stuff that's a very confusing stuff in the money world. But the best practices are actually very simple. And so then I quit my job 2 years later. I took a year off doing nothing. I considered myself retired, financially independent. I had about $3 million because I was investing and my net worth was growing. I was living well below what that investment portfolio was like kicking off every year. So then in my early retirement, I started Personal Finance Club, which started as an Instagram account, just a way to help spread this message of financial literacy. And yeah, that's what I'm still doing. Here we are.
I love it. And I love your story too when you're like, yeah, so I quit my job and then I spent a year on the beach doing what I thought you were supposed to do in retirement. And I was like, this is really boring.
Yeah. No, when I was in like I'm very old now, but in college it was during like the dot com boom of the late 90s, early 2000s. I graduated in '03. And so seeing that I was like, "Oh yeah, that's what you do. You like start a tech company, you make millions and then you're done." And then but like done what? Like then what?
Right.
And so I thought it was like, yeah, laying on the beach or whatever, but yeah, it suddenly is not a very fulfilling life. And so it was this existential crisis, which is who am I now? What is life about? What am I doing here? And so still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I do think that entrepreneurs are a different kind of human, especially if you started a company at the age of 22 and then were retired by your mid 30s. It's like that entrepreneur spirit of wanting to solve issues, wanting to provide solutions to some of the world's problems, financial literacy being a huge one. It's like that doesn't disappear. I don't think I would be happy if I wasn't doing anything.
Yeah, no, that's what I felt, which is there's no like value to my, not that I wasn't a valueless person, but it's like I wasn't doing anything, I wasn't achieving anything, I wasn't, yeah, solving anything. No tension. Like part of, for most people, I think money is maybe the primary tension in your life. If you think, oh, if I had the next
Mhm.
pay raise or the bigger house or the better car, you think that like, that's where your solutions to your life are. But I had this weird experience where overnight money was solved for me essentially. And then that tension was gone. And then it's okay, now I feel like this missing part that I want to be building something, I want to be striving towards something. And I think that's like part of a productive human experience is to like feel that and be working towards something.
Oh, for sure. If you look at, I think it's the Japanese ikigai, and that's one of like main tenets of happiness, and is just feeling like you have a purpose, even if your purpose is tending to a garden every day. It's feeling like you're adding to society in some way, whatever that means to you. So definitely get that. If I remember right, when you were working in the startup that you founded, you were only ever making 36 to $38,000 a year while living in San Diego, right?
That's true. I was the lowest paid employee at my company. There's 7 of us, including me. So it was a very small company, but paid everyone else more than me. My max take home pay was $36,000 a year, 3,000 a month. It's just the number I thought I could get by on. I was driving a 99 Ford Explorer, living with roommates, going to the grocery store, just didn't really spend any money just to barely get by and put all the money into growing the business. That was just kind of my
That's
strategy.
wild. I feel like most people would hear that, especially being in San Diego, and be like, how the hell did he do that? Was he living at home in his parents' basement the entire time? Was he like living in his car? I guess I have two questions. How did you set up yourself to be that level of frugal? And were there any specific things that you did to be able to live on such a low income in San Diego?
It's funny because it's like you can only see the world through your own eyes, and so that's
Right.
been my experience. And so growing up, my family was very frugal. Like my parents were poor when they got married, and then they got good jobs, but then they never left that frugality. So like as children, and they had me and my brother relatively young in their 20s, and so we were just like could not spend money. And then I went to college, and I had no money. I was like a broke college kid, and I literally started my company before I graduated, and then I continued to have no money. And so this experience of having no money. In addition to having no money, I wasn't reckless. I know some people have no
Mm,
money and then they just go ham on credit cards and ruin their credit and buy cars they can't afford. And frugality was always part of my, fiber where I wasn't living beyond my means, but I just was living very cheap. And then once you're just in that mentality of don't spend money, you just figure things out. So for example, like the one financial mistake I did make is I did buy a car on a loan when I was in my 20s. I bought a Mustang. This is a story I maybe have never told on a podcast before, but
what?
not the Mustang part, I told that part, but the other part.
Okay.
So I was driving a Jeep that got totaled, and in the same 24-hour period, I was 25 and found out that my live-in girlfriend of 4 years was cheating on me with a 42-year-old woman. How about that for a bombshell? We'll
Oh
see if
shit.
so yeah,
Get
that's
into the
the
beat.
story I've never told. But so that was like my little quarter life crisis. So then that all happened in a 24-hour period. My car getting totaled and me discovering this pretty important fact in my life. And I ended up buying a Mustang. At the time, I knew that
Well,
they were
they kind of
connected, but
relate.
in retrospect, I probably was not in the most stable decision making
Hey,
positions.
that's okay. You got to make the mistake early on.
Yeah. And yeah, I got a loan for it and then paid it off over the course of 4 years. So it was a used car, but it was like more than I could afford. And then when I moved to I was living in Michigan at the time. I moved to San Diego and I was able to sell that car. I bought it for $10,000 on a loan and then I sold it for 6,000, but it was all paid off by then. And so then I took that $6,000 and I bought a $3,000 car in San Diego, a 99 Ford Explorer, which was a fine car, and I drove it for the
Yeah.
next 6 years. And so then I had zero car payment. I had $3,000 in cash, and when people say, "How'd you get by?" I'm like, first of all, you probably have a $600 car payment, and I had zero. And there's some maintenance. Like there's a dude named Dave who is in my neighborhood, and every time like the belt went bad, I took it to Dave, and he charged me $500, which was like a lot of money. But like $500 once a year or so is way better than $500 every month. And then I had a roommate, so we found a. This was the years I was living in San Diego on this income were 2010 through 2016. Inflation has gone up since then, but we're not talking about like the 40s or something, right? Like it was still relatively recent. Yeah, 2 bedrooms at the time were about $2,000 a month, but my buddy and I just were like hustling and we found one for 1,400 somehow, which was like a steal. We were like
Yeah.
amazed by it. So I was paying $700 a month for rent, no car payment. That left $2,300 for the month for all of my other expenses, and I probably spent $1,000 between like food and entertainment and everything. And then I actually was saving too. So of that $3,000 I took home, $500 I was putting in my Roth IRA every month. And so even on $3,000 a month, I was actually saving and investing, and I had grown my net worth to about $110,000 before I sold the company.
That's amazing because I think so many of us, we think like $500 a month. Holy crap, there's no way I can do that. Who are making significantly more than that. Now, granted, I know that not everybody can live that way. Not everybody can be like, all right, I'm going to have a roommate and live as cheaply as possible, but it is possible. It just depends on what kind of concessions you're willing to make in your life and at the time. When you were growing up, going back to childhood, I told you we're going to get deep. We're going to find out about your trauma.
I've already been in
we've already
uncharted territory.
We've already uncovered one of them. That's why it's called the money bear. So, growing up, you had mentioned that your parents didn't necessarily have a lot of money, and you clearly saw that. So, did they talk to you about money? Was it something that was like a constant conversation in the household, or was it just like you saw the stress, the impacts, and read between the lines?
To be clear, like I'm not a rags to riches story. My parents, when they got married before I existed, were like very broke. Then they both went to college. They both went to a great college where I went, Michigan. They both got good jobs. By the time like my circuits were wired and I came online, like I blacked in, like you black out when you're like 5 years old, you like black in. By the time we blacked in, like we were like a middle class family. We were
Gotcha.
doing fine. But I just think like that their experience of being married young and being very poor was like extended into like how they talk to us about money.
Mm,
And my dad especially was like extremely frugal to the like extreme, like some crazy stories. They eventually got divorced, and when I would stay at his house, he I had a little LED alarm clock because I was in high school, and waking up for high school was like traumatizing, and because this was like pre iPhones, and so you had an alarm clock to wake you up. And he every time I would leave, because I wouldn't stay there every night because they're divorced, he would unplug the LED alarm clock to save energy. This is an LED that uses like maybe 5 cents of energy a decade or something like that.
right.
As an engineer, I know that the draw on an LED alarm clock is like basically rounds to zero. Like you can power it with a potato or something. And I was like, Dad, please do not unplug my alarm clock. It's like very annoying to have to set the time. If I don't do it
Every
right,
single time.
every single time. It's if I don't do it right, I'm gonna like miss school. And he did. So that was like the mentality that I was like growing up with, which is don't waste half a
Like
penny of
anything.
electricity for for a modest convenience. And I still
Oh
it
my
still is
gosh.
part of me. It's still like of the pie chart of my life. That's still part of me.
So then what on the flip side, was your mom also that level of frugal, or was she more of a spender or somewhere more moderate?
You know, dad ruled with an iron fist
Mhm.
before the divorce, so it didn't really matter what mom wanted. After the divorce, she was the bigger. My mom actually has a degree in computer science like I do. There's not, I'm 42 now, so there's not many 70-year-old women you find walking around planet Earth with a computer science degree, but my mom is
Right?
one of them. And by the time they got divorced, she was like kicking ass at work, far exceeding. And so I think she let her wings spread a little bit and was spending freely and buying family trips to Hawaii and things like
Mm.
that. But that was also later in my childhood, at least I was like high school. But it definitely was like an interesting view on money and marriage.
So you mentioned that you have a brother. Do you have any other siblings?
I have one older brother. He's 3 years older. His name is John. He's married. He lives in Western Michigan. He has 3 kids. So I have a nephew and 2 nieces.
Shout out
Yeah,
John.
I know.
So was he so I always think it's interesting because like you as siblings, like I have five, so there's five of us. I've got three brothers and one sister, and each of us has a very different relationship with money. And you can grow up in the same environment, have the same experiences, but one of you may be completely different in terms of like how you decided to manage money and things like that. Is he also on the spectrum of like pretty good with money, pretty frugal, and like interested in things like investing? Or is he like on the side of not interested, not going to do any of that?
Yeah, my brother and I are like half identical and like half opposites. And the
Mm,
identical part is we're both very analytical, both smart, good with numbers, nerdy. And that part of it, I think we're all the same. And I think he's probably more frugal than me now, although he has like less money, but not a lot less money. He's doing fine. But I think the part that's different is I have this like risk taker, ambitious,
mm.
like swing for the fences streak. And I hired him at my company eventually after like years of trying. And he didn't want to take the risk of working for a small company, or whatever. He eventually agreed. And then he still works for the company that bought our company now. What it's like 8 years later. So I think he's worked there like 10 years, like, which
Oh,
is
wow.
yeah, just which is great. I love the loyalty and he's paid well and he enjoys it. So, but yeah, for me, it's just I'm always on to like the bigger thing. But it's not one's not better than the other. I think sometimes one is better and sometimes one is worse and they flip flop. But Yeah, but
Yeah,
he's frugal.
for sure. Do you feel like or there were any, like, overt lessons that your parents were trying to instill in you outside of frugality? Were there any lessons where they were like, "Never use a credit card," or "Don't go into debt," or anything along those lines that really stuck with you?
Yeah, we were pretty anti-debt. I did My my they did talk to me about money. My dad is Jewish. I don't know if I need to, like, disclose that for some reason. I feel like sometimes when I'm talking about money, I'm like, very frugal. We're a money-focused people. So, it was, like, part of our conversation. We talked about credit cards. He opened up a credit card for me when I was in high school, and I guess, like, I learned it so young, it just felt so normal to me, but it was just like, you don't carry a balance. Credit cards
Mhm.
are to be paid off in full. You don't pay annual fees. The interest rate is almost irrelevant because you don't pay it because you always pay out the balance in full. And but on the flip side, I have a friend who's in his early 30s, and he recently made a comment about how as long as you make the minimum payment on a credit card statement, you don't pay any interest. And I said, dude, that is not how it works. you absolutely you don't pay interest if you pay off in full. You don't pay
Ooh.
a penalty. You don't pay like a late penalty, but you're absolutely, if you carry a balance, he thought as long as you made like that $35 minimum payment, that you pay 0 interest. And I'm like, "Bro,
Oh,
gross
no.
you have a gross misunderstanding of how credit cards work."
I feel
Um,
like it's no, it won't get reported to the
yeah,
credit bureaus, but
you're
yes,
still
it's
gonna pay
thing.
3 times more than you thought for that TV after you've been making payments for 4 years or whatever. Um,
Yeah. That's cool that they were able to get you on a credit card so young and, like, you don't have that fear necessarily of credit because it's like you saw it as a tool and you were able I think that's such a big mental block for so many people is not being able to see money and credit and debt as tools and instead it being like this ethereal thing that, like, I don't have any control over because I don't have any education on it. And it sounds like through both the actions of your parents and how they lived their lives but also in some of the systems that they got you set up with, they were really able to instill this like money is a tool and you have control over it.
yeah. I know it's weird, a little bit weird talking about your childhood as, like, an adult in the finance space because what does childhood have to do with it? But I think the answer is a lot,
So much.
and because again, we all just only have our own perspective on the world, but I can think of another kid who maybe only saw if they got bling, that means you're rich. If they're rolling in with like fancy rims, if they're spending money, if they're making it rain at the club, like that's what wealth is. And and all they correspond with wealth is spending.
Mm.
Also the credit thing, I feel like most people I talk to, even adults, think that a credit score is like more important than cash. They're like, I would rather, it's like my only goal in life is to have a good credit score. So I was like, no, you'd much rather be rich than have a good credit score. If you're rich, you don't even need a credit score. So it's like obviously there's like caveats, like it's a
For
necessary
sure.
evil living in the US. Sometimes with like insurance, it might affect your rates. And for sure, if you're like buying a home or anything, but it's not like the goal in personal finance. The goal is to become independently wealthy. So you don't need to borrow money at all. Then
Mm.
who cares about your credit score? So people will literally be like making incorrect decisions, like borrowing money at a fee, like to improve their credit score when they could just not do that and be saving and investing that money and be much better off. So it's weird to see that dilemma.
Yeah, no, it is interesting and it really does boil back to childhood for so many of us, whether it's the fear, whether it's knowing that it is a tool, whether like even I was talking to Shannon Weinstein not that long ago, who's a CPA, and she's like, I just grew up knowing all of this. Like I just automatically knew this stuff about money. And when I discovered that there's an entire population, a large population that doesn't know this stuff, it was like, oh, interesting. And then realizing like you have a skill that you have to teach it. Granted, when you're in that role, it's almost like you have to really be able to tap into your empathy to try and understand what it could possibly be like for somebody who has all the cards stacked against them, who didn't grow up that way, who think that money is a terrifying thing. I was definitely one of those people who was just like, money, I'm not good with that. I don't understand it. I'm a creative person. I don't like that's just not going to be for me. So really I think that empathy in the personal finance space is so important and it's hard to remember sometimes when we're dealing with like trolls for sure,
Yeah.
but it's like I even think about debt free at all costs or credit cards are evil or anything along those like messaging. It's when you really drill down into what their upbringing was and like how those things have impacted their life or the lives of their loved ones you can start to understand, but then begins the job of unwinding those things, of helping them overcome those like objections essentially.
Yeah. No, I love that you like mentioned empathy because different. It's the roots that we were born into run deep, and it's hard to easy for someone like me who's like very analytical and has a deep understanding. I'm like, oh, just spend less than you make and buy index funds. And people are like, no, that's terrifying because mom said you don't, when you go to the grocery store, you better pay with a credit card or whatever like the lesson is. And so it's just such a, and we never like learned this stuff formally in school. And so it's just like these little like experiences we have in life is what informs us. And then like you end up in as a 30-year-old grown adult and you're like, what am I doing here?
I'm thinking that everybody else has it figured out and you're the only one who is left
Oh yeah,
behind.
everyone
And like,
thinks that.
yes, and then you have so much shame and you're like, I'm the only one. I'm the only one who's left out of the conversation. Everybody's got it figured out. So that shame then is like preventing you from actually going
Right.
out and getting the education and the answers that you need. So
Once someone messaged me and they said, "Hey, I think I'm too late to even get started. Have I missed the boat? I think that I've screwed up. I'm 23 years old." I'm like, I like reached through my phone and grabbed that little punk by his collar and shook him back and forth. I said, "Listen here, you little punk. You're a baby."
you're
Like,
gonna be okay. I knew as soon as you started saying it, I was like, I guarantee they're like
I know, so
25,
young.
23 though. I will tell you though, like when I was 21, 22, I thought my life was over because I was like, I graduated with an English and Spanish degree. I hated both of them. I didn't recognize at 18 that like I'm very much a doer. I'm somebody who likes solving problems, managing things, and like getting things done. I hate thinking about stuff. I hate pondering the meaning of James Joyce. I hate looking into what like this person could have meant about something. And so when I graduated, I was like, here I am stuck with 80 grand of debt. And for a degree that I hate, I don't want to do anything with this degree. I've ruined my life. It's over. I might as well just work at Barnes and Noble for the rest of my life. like you, because your worldview is so small at
Yeah,
that
yeah,
point. You're just
totally.
like, I've ruined it. I should have made completely different choices, but it's
And
like,
I'm a
no,
big fan of traditional education. Like I think
yeah.
like education is the solution to all future world's problems and
Mhm.
like from people of the past. But like also you have to admit that school as it is today, which isn't how it always will be or whatever, maybe isn't the absolute best preparer of life for the individual person. And you know, like someone like you who you're like the things I studied don't really necessarily pay well and don't necessarily inspire me. And now I've missed a chance. And now look at you. You like found this thing that isn't what they taught us to do in school. It's had
Right.
$100,000 month, if I saw that tweet correctly. And
Yeah.
so maybe there's, but yeah, it just shows that yeah, your worldview is so small,
Yes.
and getting out there and experiencing and learning about other opportunities is so important.
Yeah, you never know where life is going to take you. I had never, ever could have anticipated that my life would end up the way that it is right now. And even if you had asked me 3 or 4 years ago if I saw my entire life being surrounded by teaching people how to money, I've been like, really? That's cool. But like, how
Wow.
do I get from here to there? And it's like, you just got to trust in the process that as long as you're like making the right decision in the moment, it's going to lead you to something. And like, you might have some twists and turns, but yeah, that's why I always like telling people, I'm like, I studied English and Spanish and I'm okay. You always see those Business Insider articles where the worst degrees to study in 2024, wasting your time. And I'm like, I have two of those.
Yeah. I feel like I have the
um,
opposite problem with my story, which is I'm a 6'4" white man with a master's degree in computer science, and I sold a company for millions of dollars, and so can you. You know,
oh
like
my
you're like,
God.
oh, real relatable. I'm like, yeah, I know.
But,
I have the resume to have it
but
made easy for sure.
here's the thing though, you recognize that. That's what I think is so key and why I love your transparency because so many people in your position are not transparent about that. They are not like, yeah, I recognize my privilege. I recognize that no, not most people are not going to fall into, and granted, you didn't fall into it. You worked into a multiple $1 million sale of your business. But I do like that. I like that you recognize that. I like that you recognize that there are systemic issues in our country that prevent people from doing exactly what you did in the same kind of ease or with less barriers. And I think that's what stands you out. You could easily be like another white dude creating content on the internet, not recognizing any sort of privileges and things like that, but you don't. You do recognize those privileges. So
Thanks.
kudos to you.
Yeah, I think the one of the great ways I've heard it described before is just like these invisible headwinds and tailwinds, which is for sure you could point to someone other dude who went to my high school and be like, he's not as successful, so therefore you're better or whatever. And yeah, that's some truth to that. Not to pick on anyone specifically. Yeah, I obviously worked hard, but also like when I was in my 20s, like rolling into like meetings trying to pitch my like little crappy product I had at the time, I'm sure like at the time, like I was like, oh, I like all the time, I only thought was like, man, I really want to impress them. I really want to work hard. I really want to make this thing that people like. But looking back on it, like if I'd walked in as a female of color, for
Mhm.
example, would have been received differently for
Yeah.
sure. And maybe not in a very direct way. Hey, we don't work with people like you, but maybe there's like, nah, I don't know, I don't really like it. And maybe if they didn't even see themselves as racist, or whatever, maybe there's like an invisible bias or whatever. I just know things would have been different. And so it's like this invisible tailwind, which is if I'm on a run and the wind's behind me, you don't notice because running and you're working hard and you're sweating. But if you turn around and run the other way, you're like, oh shit, this is harder. But we all are all only on our own path. And it's really hard to like directly compare. There's obviously very stark examples with police brutality and like all the
Mhm.
terrible things that can bubble up. But yeah, on an aggregate, I do think that we all should admit there are these invisible headwinds and tailwinds at the minimum that are impacting.
Oh, for sure. Even think going back to finances, as you mentioned, like just the simple act of getting a credit card in high school. Like you don't even think of that as being a privilege. Like somebody could grow up in the same way and be like, oh, yeah, my parents didn't teach me anything about money. Oh, but they did get me a credit card at
Yeah,
15
totally.
to help me build credit. And it's like those little privileges that are so deeply ingrained in generational wealth and things like that, that it, no, there are things that are important to recognize, but also important to teach about demographics, other generations can benefit from those types of privileges, or at least make moves in that direction for sure. So for you, all right, we covered your childhood. You went into college, you studied computer science, you got a master's in it, you made the right moves in terms of not picking a business insider worst degree to take in 20, whatever year it was. And then you decided to launch a business. Had you worked at all outside of the startup prior to launching that business? Had you worked anywhere else, or was it just what? Done with college, I think I'm going to start a business.
So I had internships, worked at a summer camp, I worked at a restaurant, I worked throughout this, I worked every summer in a lot of the school years. And then I had um, three different or four different technical internships, like one for a tiny company in Michigan, one for a company called Telabs in Chicago. Then 2 summers I worked as a software engineer at Microsoft, so
Mhm.
Seattle. Like at the time I thought that I was hot shit. Like I was like, I work
Yeah.
for Microsoft, but like obviously looking back, like I didn't learn anything at Microsoft for that. Like they don't the internship program is great, but like they're just trying to basically recruit you for full-time work. They're
Right.
not really giving you like serious responsibility. And so, yeah, when I started that company, like I still hadn't graduated yet. I started a company, was like working on it my final semester. I had no idea what I was doing. I literally was like Googling like how to start company. I was very concerned about the paperwork involved. Like, how do you just tell people you're starting a company? If someone gives you money, are you going to go to jail or something? Because it wasn't like licensed or
Yeah.
something. Like, I didn't know any of this stuff. And so I just was literally like feeling my way through it blindly.
Yes, but that's the thing is I think so many people out there who are considering the same thing, they think that you go into starting a business knowing how to start a business. Most of us are stumbling through it and have no idea what we're doing, but we figure it out as we go.
Yeah. That's so true. Entrepreneurs, they've looked at all the characteristics of entrepreneurs and like to find out like what makes the best entrepreneurs. Is it like people who are really good at what they do? Is it different men, women, old people, young people, like all different demographics? And the things that they found are consistent are like one, immigrants often make good entrepreneurs. And I think the reason is because the kind of people who can find their way to the US are the kind of people who just pick an impossible task
Yeah.
and then just don't give up. Like
Mhm.
that's not an easy, like if you're living in a country that doesn't have an easy path to the US, like to decide to do that must be a daunting task. The
Mhm.
persistence it must take to get the door slammed in your face 100 different ways and then still end up succeeding, I think is the exact same mentality like that you just mentioned, which is okay, now
Yeah, let's just figure
uh,
out another way that this doesn't work.
now I'm going to
And
start a company. No idea what do you do? Okay, I don't know. I'm going to start reading. I'm going to go to the library. I'm going to ask a friend. Start, and then 3 weeks later, okay, I've been working on it for 3 weeks. It started to come into view a little bit.
yes, no, so true. It takes that another layer of grit of just being like, there is no other option. I have to figure this out. It's either I don't do it and I stick to a life that I don't want, or I just figure this crap out. And for me, in the last year, so we just wrapped up my first year of full time entrepreneurship. And that was a big mindset shift that I had to kind of address. It was like, okay, the first 6 months of like when I had a full time job and was doing Clobear, it was like it was pretty easy in terms of bringing in income and growing until I got to the point where it was like, all right, this is not scalable. One-on-one coaching is not scalable. This is not something that I can continue to do, especially if I plan to do this full time. And so it was shifting into like course what's the course strategy, I guess you could say. And then after I launched the course, I was like, oh my God, this is so easy. And then I was like, coast. And that worked for a little while, but eventually you have to realize what worked 6 months ago, 3 months ago is not going to work forever as an entrepreneur. And that doesn't mean you failed. It means you have to adapt. It means you have to adjust. And doing that often means testing things out, trying new things, failing over and over again until you get something right. For you in your journey, both in the startup and personal finance club, what were some of those mindset shifts that you had to make along the way as you were adjusting and growing and then scaling? Because I feel like scaling is a whole other beast when it comes to a business.
Yeah. No, I remember being 22 and very concerned about my first dollar. And like I was trying to like read business books and stuff. And all the business books were like, this is how you take a company from 1 million to 50 million. And I'm like, what kind of stupid problem is that? I wish I had that problem. Like, how do
Right.
you go from zero to $1? That's the problem. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, like $1 million business would be so hard. But yeah, you're right. Like, I think that obviously like every level is a two thing. But yeah, I mean, my early years were rough. Like my first year in business, I made $14,000 top line revenue before expenses. So I took home like
Mm.
10,000 or something. I was just trying to like again scrap together what I could to live on. I was living on credit cards. Despite my relatively good financial upbringing, I was going into credit card debt to afford food and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. You asked about mindset shifts. Like I feel like one shift that I made was when I was early on in the business, I kept trying to enforce my worldview on what I
Mm.
thought people wanted. I made this product. I can just say what it is, so it doesn't have to be abstract. So I'm a computer programmer, and I basically was making landlord websites where there's a tool where you could deploy a landlord website very quickly. And so go to
Mm.
these landlords and be like, your website's bad, buy this one instead. And it was very hard to make that sale because they didn't really care about their website, or their cousin's uncle, nephew does their website and they don't know where the password is, or they've got tenants screaming at them and they don't have time for it. And I was like, no, you need a better website. And what they would say back to me was like, hey, we don't care about a website. What we want is more leads. We want renters calling
Mm.
us. That's our number one problem. Because if we don't have renters calling us, then we don't rent our properties, then we go out of business. And it literally took 5 years to like hearing that beat into my skull before I'm like, maybe I should like sell them what they're asking for
Ah.
instead of selling them what I think that they should want. And you can look at the growth trajectory of my business. We're kind of like trudging along, like with a little bit of growth. And then there's one year where we took 3 or 4 months off where we just rebuilt the entire product and then turned it into this other thing, which was like a syndication service where they could post a property, have
Mm.
it appear on 50 different websites, and then leads would flow in. And then once we did that and we like went back to all of our like customers we were trying to sell and we're like, hey, you want more leads? Yeah, we want more leads. And I was like, oh my gosh, business just got easier. I'm selling people what they want. But I think that entrepreneurs often suffer from that, which is you think that what you think is what everyone thinks. I think everyone suffers from this, even like visionaries like Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg or whatever. You have to take a bit of a humble pill and like
Yeah.
really understand where the market's at and how the market's changing. Like you said, what worked before, maybe it doesn't work anymore, and you have to adapt or die.
Oh yeah, I love to just the audacity of a 22, 23-year-old being like, "No, I know what your problem is, even though I've never been a landlord myself."
And I literally never even asked them what their problem was. Like, I'm so mad at myself. I'm like, if I would have just gone back and been like, "Hey, can I please buy you lunch and just ask you about your job for an hour?" If I did it to 5 landlords, like with my technology skills, I probably could have made this incredible product that would totally solve their problems and people would love. And instead, I'm just like, "Nah, I don't think I know what they
I
need."
I think I know. I think despite 5 years of people telling me otherwise,
No, it took me so
God,
long. Yeah,
you gotta love the audacity of your early 20s when you're like, you think you
totally.
know everything, but that's amazing. And it's so true because, as an entrepreneur, at least in the spaces that we exist in, it's like essentially what you're doing is selling solutions to people's problems. And if you are selling solutions to a problem that nobody has and doesn't exist and nobody cares about, that's a really quick way to go out of business. I think you're right. It's something I will say for finance creators specifically, like people in our industry, it's easy to know what the problem is. But in terms of the specific niche you're serving or what your audience wants, you have to ask. You have to be like, what do you actually need? Like, how can I serve you in a completely different way than the hundreds of other things that are out there available to you? And it begins with like really understanding who you're serving. Oh, I love
Totally,
that.
like, my early days, if you look some of my first posts are so hilarious. There's one post where I was like, "Is it a good time to invest in T-bills?" And I was, like, going into this like, very mansplaining talk about, "This is why T-bills blah, 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 blah," and then there's just, like, crickets, and I was like, "Why don't people like this? This is some insightful stuff," and then I'm like, "Why don't you like this?" But at least to my credit, at least now I was, like, trying to get feedback, and someone's, "I don't know what a T-bill is." I was like, "Oh, it's a bond," and they're like,
I don't know what a bond
"I don't know what a
is.
bond is." I was like, "Oh, okay. We need to realign our approach here."
Yes,
Um,
yeah, no, it's that humility to be able to say, okay, I do need to listen. And I, even in my early years, or I guess my early time with Clobear, where I was still figuring out who I was going to serve and how I was going to show up in the space, you want to help everybody in the beginning. You want to be the solution to everyone's problems when it comes with money. And if somebody drops into your DMs asking for a super specific question that you know is really only going to serve like maybe 10 people in your audience, you want to create content for that. But at the end of the day, you have to really focus on what am I creating that the people who are here want to see and want to hear about. And that can be hard. I think we get shiny object syndrome as entrepreneurs. So you keep seeing all these new opportunities and things you want to do. But I will say you've done a really good job, at least from my perspective, of really sticking to one thing. Because for a while, I can't remember, you've been doing this since 2019 or 2020.
20 yeah, January 2019 is when I started the Instagram account.
Okay. And so when did you decide to create an investing course? And has it pretty much the entire time been the one investing course? I know you just launched a second one, but really it's just been that one product for most of the time, hasn't it?
Yeah. So for the first, yeah, I guess the history is when I started Personal Finance Club, it was not designed to be a business. In fact, I had no intention to ever make any money. It was just a hobby, passion project, just because this was like right after my year of doing nothing. I was like, oh, doing nothing wasn't fun. I'll just do a hobby instead. So for like a year and a half, I just did the hobby. And then it was mid 2020, like middle of the pandemic. And I was getting the same questions over and over, which is like, how do I invest? What's an index fund? What's a Roth IRA? All, and you can see through the people's eyes, they have a few of the puzzle pieces and they're asking like what the pieces are around that their piece. I'm kind
Mm,
of missing the bigger picture. So I need to like paint that for you rather than just lead you in the wrong direction with your puzzle piece question. And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna make like this video course A through Z that just walks through, that lays the foundation. What's all this? How's it all work? And yeah, and so I was gonna give it away for free, just like I did everything. But I was like, you know what? People aren't gonna take it if it's free because they don't value free.
correct.
And also, if I do charge some like modest amount of money for it, I can use the money to cover some of my expenses because I was now like spending money on like our website and going to
Right.
conferences and stuff, and then maybe even like optimistically hire someone. And yeah, so that's what I did. I launched it in September 2020, and in our first week we made $110,000. And I was like, oh, I
Wow.
think I just made a company by mistake. And yes, yeah, so now I have two full-time employees. And yeah, up until a few months ago, that was our only course, and it's the normal price is $79, so it's like pretty cheap, and it's often on sale for less. And that's all we did. Just selling this like low price point course was the only thing we ever did. Now we have two courses, but the other one's also $79. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's our whole business.
it's great, like, the ability to really niche down onto one thing so that you can focus on making that particular thing really good, and then eventually moving on to the next thing. Like, I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like that's really helped me in my own business as well, and then when you get to the point of, like, "All right, we need to add something else," then it's like starting all over. It's,
Yeah.
"Okay, let's, like, relaunch and scale."
That's huge. I think that's like the number. I always want to say number one that I'm so cautious, but it's a huge mistake I see from young entrepreneurs is not being specific enough because they see companies like Amazon and Walmart. They're like, I make great tacos, so I'm gonna sell tacos. We're gonna rent snow tires, and we're gonna do wedding adventures. And I'm like, nobody's gonna buy any of those things from you because that's terrifying. Like you should just do the tacos just for a specific type of person, just for a specific area, because then when someone wants that, they're definitely going to use you. And so I think to your credit too, I think you've done the same thing where you're like, all right, this is my perspective. These are the types of people I'm helping. And because then if you're just like
Let me help
another,
everybody. Yeah.
yeah, this is the dictionary of investing and money and budgeting and couponing. And it's
Mhm.
just, yeah. And even I think sometimes I'm a little bit guilty of that because like Personal Finance Club is a little bit too generic. I almost should be called like how to invest if you're a millennial club or something like that. I don't know, like, it was a little too long, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that doesn't have us quite the ring to it. All right, I have a couple more questions and then I'll let you go. So, since we have touched both on entrepreneurship and, of course, money management, I couldn't have you on here without talking a little bit about money management. First, if somebody, you've started several businesses, it wasn't just the startup and personal finance club. You also have experience in launching a couple of other, don't you?
It's 5, soon to be 6 total companies I've started now, with 6 being launched this summer coming
Uh,
soon. Yeah.
Amazing. So I want your top 3 tips for somebody who is interested in launching their own business. Top 3 tips. Jeremy Schneider, go.
Oh my gosh. These generic ones are tough because it's like, what kind of business is it? I'd say, despite all my failings as a young 20-something starting a business, and you were right to call me out on the audacity, and I was right to point out my failings and how long it took me to find a better path, I'll say the thing that saved me was just the persistence. Well, I don't know why, if it's my upbringing, if it's in my DNA, if I whatever, but I didn't give up. And if I would have gone 2 years digging into credit card debt and then crawl back to Microsoft and be like, please give me a job so I can get out of debt, I would have a different story. It'd be a fine story, I'm sure. But in terms of starting a business, you have to be persistent. So that's different. That's number one, is be persistent. I know these are very
Perfect.
vague, because sometimes people are like, hey, give me like this A to Z list where if I just check all of these things off, then I have a successful business. I honestly don't think that list exists. Like, I was talking
No.
to my friend last night who's starting a tech startup guy. He's a super rich, successful guy himself. And we just struggle with these very basic questions, which is, should we be making blog posts or should we be like emailing potential customers? And you could probably do both. And we don't know which one's going to work. They're both probably fine. How to prioritize, that's a challenge. So it's like really hard to give really specific advice, especially today. So number one, persistence. Number two, I would say improvement. If you're persistently doing the exact same thing over and over with no like data that shows it's making progress at all, you might never get there. But if you're incrementally making little things better, and something you said earlier, which was like, if I had talked to myself 4 years ago and said where I am today, it seems crazy. It seems impossible. It's like looking up at the top of Mount Everest and seeing someone standing there. You're like, well, that's impossible. But if you
Yeah.
look down and you 2 steps in front of you, it's to take those 2 steps and then take the next two and take the next two. And in this weird metaphor that I just cooked up, like those steps are like those little incremental improvements, and where it's you're just one little thing. You're not going to become a brilliant whatever overnight, but hey, maybe you can just look up a better domain name, or you can read a book about this, or you can talk to a mentor about that, or like a little different little thing every day. If you improve one little tiny thing per day, 365 days later, you've improved 365 little things, which ends up to being a lot.
Yep.
And as they say, I heard this recently, that's like basically anything is accomplishable in 5 years. If you just say, okay, I'm going to start taking these little steps 5 years later. If I started walking today, I could walk to New York in 5 years. That seems crazy, but like, how could you go so far across the entire country? But just one little step at a time in 5 years, and same for business.
Yeah.
All right, full disclosure. I normally just give those 2 business tips, and I don't need a third.
You're like, oh, this is going to come from the depths of
Yeah, I
Jeremy's
know.
brain at what time is it there? 10 a.m.
The focus one I think is good, although it's cheating because we already just talked about
Give me something else. Come on.
yeah. Let me think.
Six-time founder. You got to have something that you're like, I
All
see
right.
this mistake being made all the time. Or, all right, what do you
Can I
got?
swear on this podcast?
Of course.
All right, because I already have. All right, here's the tip number 3 is fuck innovative ideas. I think new entrepreneurs are so into thinking of an idea that no one's ever done before, and that is how you start a successful business. But it's not. You know how you start a successful business is you just do something that people want and need, and just do it a little bit better than other people are doing it. If you think of a brand new idea that no one's ever done before, here's all the problems with that. First, it's probably going to suck, which is why no one's doing it. 2, if it's a good idea, you have a new problem, which is you need to go explain to people that they have this problem. You have to explain
Right.
to people that there's a solution. You have to explain to people that you're the solution, and you have to do all that to make a sale instead of just saying, hey, I'm a better version of that. And 3, assuming all those things are true, that it doesn't suck, that you can convince people to buy it, as soon as that's true, you're going to have a flood of competition where they say, hey, I'm a better version of that. And that's just the nature. And I think that new entrepreneurs are like, I need to think of an idea. Being first to market is a very, very modest advantage. If you look at the great companies of the world, very rarely did they think of the idea. Microsoft didn't think of the operating system. Facebook didn't think of the social network. Just go through the list of great companies that are the biggest companies in the world. Google didn't think of the search engine. Google's just like a slightly better version of the shitty search engine. So go find a point of pain where a lot of crappy businesses exist, and then just do it better, and then business becomes so much easier because they're all paying. And like every day we interact with crappy businesses, like, oh my god, I hate this business so much. And some of these things like Spectrum or Comcast or whatever, you can't really just become a
Right.
ISP overnight. But because what do we do, both of us? Like we
Same
didn't
thing.
we didn't think we do the same thing as each other, and we also didn't think of the idea like what someone should do is explain money to people. Like that's not an innovative idea, but we're just doing it slightly better in a slightly different way, different audiences, whatever.
Yeah.
And look at the modest success we're both having. So yeah, fuck innovative ideas.
Yes, no, I love that. And not only that, to be innovative is expensive. Like
Yeah.
in every turn that you go through, it is expensive. I love that. I could feel the passion in that one too.
Thanks.
You're
I'm
like,
just glad I thought of something on the spot.
you're
Normally,
like,
maybe you're
fuck
gonna have to have your
innovation.
editor squeeze that thinking time down a
Nah,
little bit.
nah, you're good. You're good. All right. Now, shifting into personal finance for Mr. Personal Finance Club, what are 3 big tips of somebody who is listening and is shit? What he did sounds really cool. I am interested, but I'm overwhelmed. I'm scared. I don't think I can do this. I've got debt. I've got whatever. What are like the first 3 steps that you usually recommend somebody, or something unique if you're feeling creative?
Just in terms of like personal finance in general.
Yeah, like if you're creating an Instagram post where everybody's like, how do I get started on this big mountain, this Everest of personal finance, of getting to that $1 million net worth,
Okay.
of getting debt free? What is that? What do you say are the first 3 steps?
Yeah, I'm a simple man, so I like to keep it very simple. I'd
Mhm.
say the first thing that I think is the most important is you have to spend less money than you make. And I think that I was actually just talking to someone the other day. He was like asking me to do some sort of guest appearance in this high school educational thing, which I was happy to do. But then he like gave me this long list of different ways people can take on debt, and he wanted like that to be a test for finding good versus bad debt. And they're very like cryptic situations. Okay, you're borrowing money and you're going to go put it into mutual funds, or you're going to take a loan and do this. And I'm like, I
For
think that
high
his
school?
yeah, for high school, I think that his perspective was, I hope he's not listening to this because he probably will figure it out. But I think his perspective was that like some of these are good and some of these are bad. And I'm like, bro, like all of this is nonsense.
Yes.
This ranges from bad to worse. Like I think the first thing you do is spend less money than you make. You don't like because I do think that some people don't really get that message. They just see
Right.
spending as wealth. And so they're like, okay, if spending is wealth, I can do more spending if I take on debt. And I'm going to, step 1 is spend, step 2 is take on debt. Don't know what steps 3 and 4 is, and step 5 is you're rich. But nope, you've taken the wrong first 2 steps. Step 1 is spend less money than you make. And so if you're making $500,000 a year and you spend $500,000 a year, you have 0. You're broke.
Mm.
Broke person, you have 0 at the end of the year. But if you're making 60,000 a year and you spend 40, because some people make 40,000 a year and they live their life just the same.
Yeah.
So if you make 60 and you spend 40 and you invest 20,000 a year, you'll easily be a multimillionaire over the course of your career. And like you said earlier, it's easy for me to be like, as a single dude, like running a tech startup, I was able to like live in with roommates and drive used cars. It's not as easy for everyone, for sure. But I think we all have choices in life.
Absolutely.
I think to the level of luxury. Are you unplugging your LED clock to save a half a cent? I hope not. That's gone too far, but you know.
For sure. No, I love that. And even too, just looking at that, if you look at your money and you realize, shit, I really can't cut out anymore, then it's like, all right, it's time to also look at making more money.
All right. Number 2 is invest early and often. And this one kind of speaks to, I think, people's fear a lot. There's a big group of people, I think, who are natural savers, naturally frugal. They naturally spend less than they make. But then when it comes to, and saving is like your defense, spending less you make is your defense. Your offense is putting your money to work and growing it. When it comes to that offense, they like clam up, they get scared. And rightfully, because we never learned this stuff. It's a scary world. Like options, futures, pork bellies, crypto, my brother's
NFTs.
yeah, NFTs, my uncle's restaurant he wants me to invest in. What a crazy world. Like I could never be in that world. But the truth is investing can actually be pretty simple. And in order to actually get ahead with money, saving is enough. If you save $500 a month for 40 years, 500 times 12 times 40 is $240,000. And that's going to be suffering the loss to inflation along the way. And so 40 years might be worth 120 in today's prices. 120 grand ain't not retiring on that. You're going to be basically borderline poverty in retirement. But if you invest that money for 40 years, it's about $3 million. Even if that loses to inflation, you end up with 1.5 million today's dollars. You can retire at 1.5 million. You got a lot of options in life. And so you have to invest. You have to put your money to work.
It's non-negotiable. I think so many of us think exactly what you said, which is, oh, I'll just hoard my way to wealth. Like I'll just keep it in a savings account. And that's just not the case.
I think it is that kind of like mentality. What's like the non-abundant mentality where it's like, there's a word for it. What's the opposite of none?
Scarcity.
Yeah, scarcity mentality. Thank you. It's like we always say these words, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's because you're like, oh, there's not enough. I'm gonna just, and when you, and you often hear from people like less than 12 months into their investing
Mm.
career where they're like, I put in $1,000 and now it's 950. Should I stop? I'm like, no, Jesus, you should go harder because now you're
Yes.
buying at a discount. But once you do it for a few years, you can get over those like early on jitters, I think.
Fear. Yeah, for sure. All right. What's your third
All
and
right,
final
number
tip,
3,
sir?
this one's not really part of my core too, but I just wanna talk about because I think it'd be fun with you, is don't buy permanent life insurance. Like, whenever
Oh my God. I'm so honored that you said this on that podcast. Yes. Actually, earlier when we were talking about how people like when they're starting businesses and they're like, oh, I just want to be like the Amazon or I just want to start off there. It's like, no, that's not how we start off. We start off with focus on one thing that you're going to do really well. I was thinking the same like logic is when those IUL salesmen or whole life insurance salesmen, they're like the Warren Buffetts of the world and the Rockefellers of the world do this. And it's, you're not the Warren Buffett of the world. You're also
Yeah.
not a Rockefeller. Calm down.
And not only that, like, it would be counterproductive for someone to be doing, yeah, just like Amazon sells 50,000 items, so should you? Like, no, you shouldn't. That would be worse for you.
Yes,
Um,
yes. That's because they're Amazon or it's because they're Warren
right.
Buffett. It's because
And they're
they're
doing
like,
it for a different reason. And so like
exactly.
they have the craziest arguments. So like, by the way, if you're hearing this for the first time, what we're talking about is not all insurance, and it's not even
No.
all life insurance. If you have children or you have people who depend on your income to live, you should buy term life insurance, which is pretty cheap, like $50 a month or less. It'll cover you $500,000 or $1 million if you die, and it'll cover you for 20 years, which means after 20 years, your kids will be grown and you will have been investing along the way. So therefore, you won't need life insurance after 20 years. But there's
Yes.
this like other world of insurance, which is called permanent life insurance, which has a bunch of different names like whole life insurance, index universal life insurance, variable universal life insurance, MPI, some other ones,
Infinite banking.
infinite banking.
I've even heard it called rich man's Roth IRA. And I'm like, how is that legal?
So offensive. I know. I literally think there needs to be like legislation on
Regulation.
this because you can't do that with investments. I
Nope.
couldn't be like, I literally got on a sales call. I bought one of these insurance policies, and this guy was like saying it's a guaranteed 12% annual return. I was like, my God,
We
if you
can't do that.
said that about an investment, you would go in handcuffs.
Yeah.
And maybe they should be, but no one's policing it or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, be cautious of those because everything the insurance salesmen say, it's like literally like projections, like the opposite of the truth. And
100%.
yeah,
And Jeremy's got some really good posts on it on personalfinanceclub.com. So definitely if you I know it's so crazy. Every time I mention it, I get floods of messages of, I'm so glad I saw this post. I was just talking to somebody who was trying to sell me this. And I'm like,
yep.
yeah, this is why I'm forced to talk about this, even though
I
I hate
know.
talking about it. Because
Same talking about it. I don't like
ah,
ripping on anything. I don't like tearing anyone
yeah,
down. It's like just not. I don't think it's general. I don't like it. I don't think it's good for people. I don't think it's good for me. They
yeah,
attack me back whenever I like point out the flaws with their product. But yeah, you're right. Every single day, someone's getting scammed, and so it's kind of like
yeah.
I said every 2 weeks, like my alarm goes off. Oh, tell people
Time
it's a scam
time to talk
again.
about this. Yeah, no, Delianne even has like a highlight reel that's literally or a highlight in her bio that's all about permanent life insurance. And I'm
Nice.
like, that's actually a really good idea. Awesome. Okay, those are all my tough questions for you. Before I move into my two final very quick fun questions, tell the folks where can they find you?
Oh yeah, Personal Finance Club is the name of my brand. It's very easy to search. Instagram is where most of the magic currently happens at Personal Finance Club or TikTok or the website personalfinanceclub.com.
Hell yeah. All right, fun questions. First, is there anything you're binging right now? Whether like a book series, a podcast, a television show, anything that you're like obsessed with right now?
Oh,
YouTube series,
you know
new
what it
brand of
is? Oh,
cereal?
actually, I was gonna say there's nothing, but there's something that's really embarrassing.
What is
I've
it?
been playing chess on my phone, and I'm very addicted. And I hate chess. I'm terrible at it. I'm like a very bad chess player, and I hate it with a white hot burning passion. And like I'm a very even keeled guy, and I'm happy and I'm calm, and like it instills this rage from deep inside of me that I hate when people beat me at chess. It's so mean of them how they keep putting my king in check all the time.
Oh my gosh, that's so
Um,
funny. How the heck did that happen?
I don't
That was
know.
the last thing I was expecting you to say.
I've never talked about this, so you're finding all sorts of, and then I somehow like a chess video popped up on YouTube at one point, and now YouTube exclusively suggests. I literally can't see, like when I usually watch on my TV, so I just have a remote. I can't like search for stuff very
Yeah,
easily, and so anywhere I scroll in any direction, it's just chess as far as the eye can see.
that's
So I'm like, oh my god, show me something
hilarious.
else, YouTube.
Oh my god, you sound like an 80-year-old man. You're like, "I
Thank
am
you.
obsessed with chess."
Chess is cool.
That's
Chess is a
adorable.
young people's person's game,
Is
by the way.
it?
Now
Now
it's
that with
like
the Queen's
blowing up.
Gambit, yeah,
It's
with
blowing up.
that it did make me think for a second that I might wanna play chess.
There you
Yeah,
go.
that was endearing. That was
Find
endearing.
me on
The
chess.com. You can
See,
challenge me. You'll probably win.
the facts that you guys are learning about Jeremy Schneider today. All right, and then the final one, going back to your childhood, what is your very first money memory?
I don't know. Maybe being at McDonald's and my dad not letting me supersize my meal, even though I was super hungry for reasons of not wanting to pay 50 cents. For health reasons, that's legit, but it wasn't for health
Yes.
reasons. It was for financial reasons. I was like, Dad, I'm so hungry.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, too
oh
funny.
no, no, actually, when I was in, they're all my dad not letting me spend money. When I was in like elementary school, like Nike Airs were the coolest thing. That we had a strict limit of like, I think it might have been $40, which actually seems like a lot in
Mhm.
retrospect, but you couldn't spend more than $40 on shoes, and you couldn't get Nike Airs for $40. But then like I found this like one pair of like white, pink, and green Nike Airs like in the discount bin that no one wanted, but they said Nike Air on them, so I got them because they were under 40. Then everyone made fun of me because I had ugly shoes. I was like, okay, that's legit. These are ugly shoes. I should have just bought cool shoes that didn't say Nike Air.
Oh my gosh, too funny. Pink and green Nike Airs. I
They were
think
not
we need
cool.
to gotta bring them back.
Yeah, and then maybe now they'd be cool. I should probably rock them now. See if I can find them on eBay.
Oh my gosh, too funny. I love it. Thank you for coming on today. It was good chatting with you. Learned some new stuff about you, and that was always good chat. Always good catching up.
Thanks, Clobear. Same. Thanks for having me. It's great to talk to you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for listening to the Money Bear podcast. If you've made it this far, do us a favor, take 2 seconds, rate, review, and subscribe. It seriously means the world to me. And if you just take a second to do that, I will appreciate you endlessly. And if you do, let me know on Instagram and I'll thank you personally. So, got that. And of course, since we were talking about anything financial on this show, please note that nothing on this show is intended as financial advice. I don't know you, unfortunately. And because of that, I cannot tell you what to do with your money. You got to work with a financial professional who knows your situation, who is preferably a fiduciary. And keep in mind that everything that we talk about on this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It's all my opinion. So, there's that. If you want to see our full terms and conditions, head on over to the show notes. And while you're there, we've got free resources for you to get started on your money journey down in the show notes as well, including a free guide to help you with your budgeting templates and budgeting tutorials and investing 101, understanding the different accounts that are out there. All that good stuff is inside of my free guide, which is also available at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/guide. And if you're ready to take our relationship to the next level, also, I've got a free investing class that is available at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/webinar. We host it once a month. If you're ready to take our relationship to the next level, I am also hosting a monthly investing class. And that investing class, you can find the times we're offering it this month at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/webinar. That link is in the show notes as well. And that's where you have the chance to meet me live and ask those money questions live. It's a good time. We've had over 20,000 people as of recording this join or register. And yeah, it's always nice to meet you guys. So I hope to see you there. Again, all that is available down in the show notes. So thank you again for coming and listening. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next week.